What is going on, wonderful people? It's Mnemonics Perfectionalis, where medicine makes perfect sense. This video is brought to you by Picmonic, pictured mnemonics that help you memorize and retain lots of medical information. See the link in the description and the link in the first comment to get a special discount when you join Picmonic. You can also try Picmonic for free. Welcome to my microbiology playlist. Today is part 18. We'll continue discussing fungi. So click the like button, click the subscribe button, and let's get started. You can find all of these videos in my microbiology playlist as well as in my Picmonic playlist. In part 1, we talked about actinomyces, listeria, corynebacteria, and nocardia. Part 2 was about the Clostridia, including Clostridium tetani, Clostridium botulinum, Clostridium difficile, and Clostridium perfringens. Part 3 was about staph and strep pneumo. Part 4, the rest of the strep and the enterococci. Part 5, Bacillus anthracis, Bacillus cereus, and the mycobacteria. Part 6 was about Neisseria and Moraxella. Part 7, Haemophilus influenzae, Bordetella pertussis, Pastorella, Brucella, and Francisella. In part 8, we talked about Legionella and H. pylori. In part 9, we talked about Campylobacter jejuni, Vibrio cholera, Escherichia coli, Klebsiella pneumoniae. In part 10, we discussed Pseudomonas aeruginosa, Proteus, and Salmonella. Part 11 was about Shigella and Yersinia. In part 12, we discussed Treponema pallidum, Leptospira, and Borrelia, which cause syphilis, leptospirosis, and Lyme disease respectively. In part 13, we talked about some atypical bacteria such as Chlamydia, Rickettsia, and Mycoplasma. In part 14, we talked about the torch infections. In part 15, we talked about some miscellaneous gram-negatives, at least anatomically, the Anaplasma, the Bartonella, the Coxiella, the Ehrlichia, and the Rickettsia. And starting from part 16, we began to talk about fungi, such as histoplasmosis, blastomycosis, coccidioidomycosis, and paracoccidioidomycosis. These are fungal infections, systemic fungal infections to be specific. Part 17, more fungi, Candida, Aspergillus, and Cryptococcus. Today we shall talk about Mucor Rhizopus, Pneumocystis girovecii, which causes PCP pneumonia, as well as Sporothrix schenki. Schenki, by the way, is the last name or the surname of the medical student who discovered this organism. Most medical students today do not even read books, let alone isolate organisms. But I digress. What does microbiology even mean? Ology means the study of. Of what? Of bio, which is life. What kind of life? The microscopic life, the small life. Microbes that can lead to human diseases are divided into bacteria, fungi, viruses, and parasites. But be careful, because many parasites are macroscopic rather than microscopic. Ergo, the field of microbiology is divided into bacteriology, fungology or mycology, virology, and parasitology. Now get a piece of paper and doodle with medicosis. There is a big difference between saying beta-lactam and beta-glucan. One has nothing to do with the other. Beta-lactam is referring to medications that treat bacterial infections, whereas beta-glucan is a component of the cell wall of the fungus rather than bacteria. So beta-lactam is part of the medications that treat bacteria, whereas beta-glucan is part of the cell wall of the fungus. Do not confuse the two. If you make that mistake again, now you're just somebody that I used to know. How do we classify bacteria? Based on the gram stain. We classify bacteria into gram-positive bacteria and gram-negative bacteria. Gram-positive bacteria could be cocci or rods. As for the gram-negatives, also cocci and rods. Purple versus pink. You can learn more about these bacteria by watching my Picmonic videos from video 1 through 15, which you can find in my microbiology playlist. Link is in the comments. If you wish to see more videos like this in the future, drop a petri dish or a bacterial emoji in the comments. I will not forgive myself if I did not tell you that you can tell the difference between bacteria that ferment lactose versus bacteria that do not ferment lactose. The lactose fermenting bacteria appear as pink colonies on McConkey agar, whereas those bacteria that do not ferment lactose appear as white colonies on McConkey agar. Don't ever forget that. Here is a question for the pros. Is E. coli lactose fermenter or lactose non-fermenter? If you know, comment below. Let us learn some basic facts about fungi.
In this Picmonic, we'll cover fungi basics, and we start by representing fungi as the fungi. The functional units of fungi are hyphae, shown as the high five with hyphae, which are filamentous extending structures. A mass of hyphae are called mycelium, the mouse lion, and are the fungal equivalent to a bacterial colony. Septa, the scepter, are internal wall segments and dividers which separate hyphae into individual cells. Fungi have cell walls composed of chitin, depicted as the chicken, which maintain the integrity of the intracellular environment while protecting the cell from damage. These organisms are saprophytic, the sap, because they live off of dead or decomposing matter. They release digestive enzymes, illustrated as the enzyme fish, and later absorb the digested matter from their food source. Fungi can reproduce in two different ways. Sexual reproduction can occur, the sex signs high-fiving, and this takes place during unfavorable environmental conditions, leading to fusion of two hyphae of compatible fungi. In sexual and asexual reproduction, haploid spores, the hat-plaid spores, are dispersed and grow into new fungi. One type of fungi, yeast, undergoes budding, shown as the yeast budding fungi. Budding is a type of asexual reproduction in which two identical daughter cells bud from the original yeast cell. So, let's summarize the basics of fungi. The functional units of this organism are called hyphae, which are filamentous extending structures. A mass of these hyphae are called mycelium. Remember that septa divide hyphae into individual cells. The cell walls of fungi are composed of chitin, and these organisms are saprophytic, meaning their food source is dead or decaying organisms. They release digestive enzymes to break down matter, which is later absorbed by the fungi. Fungi can participate in asexual as well as sexual reproduction. Haploid spores are released, which grow into new fungi. Yeast, a type of fungus, undergoes budding to create daughter cells, and this is an example of asexual reproduction.
If you want some colorful pictures to help you categorize and classify the bacteria and the fungi, Picmonic has many resources. Here is a classification for the fungal infections. We can divide fungal infections into superficial fungal infections or superficial mycoses and deeper ones that affect more systems, systemic fungal infections or systemic mycoses. Skin versus viscera. Fungal diseases in the skin tend to be milder than the visceral systemic fungal infections, which tend to be more severe. If your fungal infection is mild, the treatment usually involves topical or, at the very most, oral therapy. But if the disease is systemic, forget the topical. Go for oral or even parenteral antifungal treatment. Here is a list of superficial mycoses. Here are the fungal infections such as tinea versicolor, many colors, hypopigmentation, and hyperpigmentation. Tinea capitis, which affects the head. Tinea corporis, which affects your corpse or your body, the trunk. Tinea cruris for the inguinal area. Tinea pedis, in French, le pied mean the feet, and a podiatrist is a person who checks your feet. And tinea unguinum, which is a fungal infections in your nail. Those are the names of the infections. How about the names of the fungi themselves? Tinea versicolor is caused by Pityriasis versicolor, that's the name of the organism or the fungus, whereas the other tinea are caused by this group of fungi, the trichophyton, the epidermophyton, and the microsporum. Next, we have systemic mycoses, such as histoplasma, which causes histoplasmosis, blastomyces, which cause blastomycosis, coccidioides, which causes coccidioidemycosis, and paracoccidioides, which cause, you guessed it, paracoccidioidemycosis. We talked about all of these guys in lecture number 16. But wait, there is more. We can also add a third category for the opportunistic fungal infections. What does opportunistic mean? They wait for the opportunity. They wait until your immune system deteriorates and then they wreak havoc upon your body. These include Aspergillus, which causes aspergillosis, Candida, which can lead to candidemia, oral thrush, esophageal thrush, vaginal thrush, diaper rash, and more. Then we have Cryptococcus neoformans, which causes cryptococcosis or cryptococcal meningitis. Then we have Mucor and Rhizopus, which cause mucormycosis, otherwise known as zygomycosis, because it affects the zygoma or the zygomatic process, which is part of your face. It's part of the skull. Then we have Pneumocystis jirovecii, which causes Pneumocystis pneumonia, as well as Sporothrix schenki, which causes sporotrichosis. All of these diseases tend to be more severe in the immunocompromised persons. The weaker your immune system, the greater the risk. That's the essence of an opportunistic infection. Today we'll learn about Mucor Rhizopus, Pneumocystis jirovecii, and Sporothrix schenki. Here's another classification for fungi. We can divide them into monomorphic and dimorphic. One shape versus two different shapes. One shape is monomorphic, two shapes is dimorphic. What do you mean by one shape? I mean it's either a mold, which is hyphae or pseudohyphae, or a yeast. However, dimorphic can have two shapes. When the temperature is cold, I become a mold. But when the temperature is hot, I become a yeast. So the fungus is mold in the cold and yeast in the beast. It's the same fungus, but in two different shapes. It's like Clark versus Superman. Same guy, in different environmental conditions. So in that sense, Superman is dimorphic. What do I mean by cold? 25 degrees Celsius, which is room temperature. What do I mean by warm temperature? This is the body temperature, 37 degrees Celsius. Mold in the cold, yeast in the beast. These are hyphae. This is yeast. In the last video, we talked about Candida, which was dimorphic, Aspergillus, which was monomorphic, and Cryptococcus, which was monomorphic. Today, it's time to focus on Mucor Rhizopus, Pneumocystis jirovecii, and Sporothrix, starting with Mucor Rhizopus.
This Picmonic describes Mucor and Rhizopus, which are two fungi that cause the disease mucormycosis, or less commonly called zygomycosis, and these organisms can be remembered by the mucus rhino. Recall that these are both fungi with this fun guy character. It is important to distinguish these from other fungi by both visualizing irregular non-septate hyphae on microscopy, demonstrated by the nunceptor, as well as seeing branching at wide angles over 90 degrees, shown by the branching angle over 90 degrees, which helps distinguish these organisms from Aspergillus, which branches at acute angles. Those who are most at risk for this infection are leukemic patients, depicted here by the Leuc key, as the white blood cell defense against these fungi is lacking in this population. Due to the affinity of these organisms to proliferate in environments with excess ketones and glucose, exhibited by the ketone key and glue bottle, patients in diabetic ketoacidosis are at increased risk for mucormycosis, shown here by the dyed bead pancreas holding keys on an acidic lemon, dyed bead pancreas with key to acidic lemon. Infection can spread from the nasal sinuses to the orbits and brain, characteristically resulting in a rhinocerebral frontal lobe abscess, demonstrated by the abscess guy on the frontal lobe of the rhino. This is a result of the infection traveling from the nasal sinuses with penetration through the cribriform plate into the brain, manifested as the crib brain. Often, patients can develop meningitis as a result. Lastly, due to the vascular invasion of these fungi, black necrotic eschar can result on the face of an affected patient, illustrated as the black eschars on the rhino's face. Another complication of mucormycosis, though not pictured, include cavernous venous thrombosis, as these fungi preferentially affect vasculature. Treatment for mucormycosis includes amphotericin B administration immediately, and surgical therapy may be indicated if there is extensive disease and infected tissues. So to review, let's recall that Mucor and Rhizopus are fungi that cause mucormycosis, and can be distinguished by their irregular non-septate hyphae and their branching pattern with wide angles over 90 degrees. Those at risk for infection include leukemic patients, along with those who have excess ketones and glucose, such as diabetic ketoacidosis patients. These infections can result in rhinocerebral frontal lobe abscess secondary to cribriform plate penetration into the brain. These patients can also present with black necrotic eschars on their face related to vascular invasion and tissue necrosis.
Next, let's talk about Pneumocystis jirovecii, which causes Pneumocystis pneumonia.
Pneumocystis jirovecii, portrayed by the nude Mona sisters in the Jeep, is a fungal infection that commonly causes infection in the immunocompromised, such as patients with AIDS, shown by the Band-Aid. Patients classically present with fever, the fever beaver, and hypoxemia, the hippo with the oxygen mask. The disease can be diagnosed with bronchoalveolar lavage, portrayed by the lung volcano with lava, and biopsy, represented by the biopsy needle. On biopsy, a methenamine silver stain, represented by the moth with silver mine wings, can be used to identify the organism. Saucer and cup-shaped yeast forms are the classic description of the yeast. Patients with Pneumocystis jirovecii commonly display diffuse interstitial pneumonia on chest X-ray, which can also aid in the diagnosis of the disease. Treatment is TMP-SMX, shown by the tampon character riding the SMX snowmobile. Because HIV patients are particularly prone to disease when their CD4 count drops below 200, prophylactic treatment should be given, shown by him using his purple axes to deliver these CDs, with 200 written on them, as a gift from the Tooth Fairy.
Then we have Sporothrix.
We can remember the characteristics, presentation, and treatment of Sporothrix schenkii by this scene with the oft-derided yet terrifically naive Sporothrix cereal rabbit. Sporothrix schenkii is a species of fungi, shown by the fungi, that is thermally dimorphic, depicted by the thermal dime Morpheus, which means it exists either as a mold at around 25 degrees Celsius or as a yeast at around 37 degrees Celsius. When it is found as a yeast, it demonstrates a characteristic cigar-shaped yeast form, portrayed by the cigar with unequal budding ashes. This fungus can be found on plant tissues and is classically transmitted to humans via traumatic injury in the form of a rose thorn prick, illustrated by the rose thorn, which is also the origin of its pseudonym rose gardener's disease. Additionally, Sporothrix can be contracted via packaging peat moss, which serves as a reservoir for the fungi and can be recalled by the packaged peat moss. Infection with Sporothrix results in local pustule or ulcer, shown by the ulcer volcano, with the eventual formation of nodules on draining lymphatics, exhibited by the nodules with lymph limes. From a diagnostic perspective, the presence of asteroid bodies within microabscesses is helpful in making a presumptive histologic diagnosis of sporotrichosis. Now, treatment consists of potassium iodide, recalled by the bananas and iodine bottle, which is inexpensive and widely available, though this is considered a second-line therapy due to thyroid and gastrointestinal side effects. First-line treatment is centered around the antifungal medication itraconazole, shown by the I in the A hole. However, other antifungals such as terbinafine and fluconazole can also be used, and of note, amphotericin B should be added to the treatment regimen if disseminated disease occurs. So to recap, remember that Sporothrix schenkii is a fungus that is thermally dimorphic with a cigar-shaped yeast form. This species of fungi is contracted via a rose thorn prick or packaging peat moss and results in a local pustule or ulcer with the formation of nodules on draining lymphatics. Treatment regimens recommend potassium iodide as a second-line therapy and an antifungal, such as itraconazole as a first-line therapy, with amphotericin B reserved for disseminated disease.
After you watch these Picmonics, you can actually quiz yourself. There are several multiple choice questions after each Picmonic. Multiply that by 1,800 Picmonics and you easily get more than 5,000 multiple choice questions on this website. By the way, can you tell me the answer to these questions? Comment below if you know. You can browse these Picmonics by your favorite book, by subject, and by system. Every single day they give you a quiz based on the topics that you have reviewed before, so that you can refresh your memory. This is my methodology of understanding and mastering these Picmonics. First, I watch the animation, then the story animation, and then I watch the animation again. I pause and stare at the picture. I close my eyes and use my imagination to put each item and each character in its place. Then I open my eyes and see how I did. I solve the quiz. I get a piece of paper and write down the place of the characters. I revisit the same Picmonic on day 2, on day 50, and on day 30. This use of spaced repetition helps me remember these Picmonics for a very long time, sometimes years or decades. For example, I still vividly remember the Picmonic on tuberous sclerosis, which I've watched more than 10 years ago. You can try Picmonic for free. You can use it on your desktop computer or on a mobile app or even on a tablet. They use visual, audio, storytelling. You can read a script. You can practice spaced repetition. There are multiple choice questions after each Picmonic. You can even create your own Picmonic and watch new Picmonics made by other students just like you. And as is the habit towards the end of each video, we compare among the organisms. Today we'll compare among these 3 organisms, Mucor Rhizopus, Pneumocystis Rickettsia, as well as Sporothrix. Mucor and Rhizopus together, Pneumocystis Rickettsia, and Sporothrix. Mucor and Rhizopus, their hyphae are non-septate. Their hyphae are branching at 90-degree angles. So let me try to draw this. Here is hyphae. Look at that. Oh, that's 90 degrees. That's a very wide angle, as you can tell. Do we consider Mucor and Rhizopus as monomorphic or dimorphic? They can exhibit dimorphic characteristics, which means mold in the cold and yeast in the beast. Next, Pneumocystis Rickettsia can also be considered dimorphic or even polymorphic, many different shapes. Its yeast shape looks like a saucer and cup. What does that mean? It means a circle within a circle. Sporothrix schenki, dimorphic, mold in the cold, yeast in the beast. The yeast looks like a cigar. Next, let's talk about clinical diseases. Mucor and Rhizopus can lead to a black necrotic eschar on the face, hence the old name zygomycosis. Nose, and then cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone, and then we're gonna penetrate through and infect the brain, causing frontal lobe abscess in the brain. If you have diabetic ketoacidosis or if you have leukemia, you are high risk. Pneumocystis jirovecii causes PCP pneumonia or pneumocystis pneumonia. Common in immunocompromised persons, this can lead to hypoxemia and can lead to fever as well. Describe the pneumonia. What type of pneumonia? Is it lobar? No. Lobular? No. Interstitial? Yes. Is the pneumonia localized or diffuse? The answer is diffuse. As for Sporothrix schenki, it causes sporotrichosis, which has three types: cutaneous, lymphocutaneous, and disseminated. It can infect your skin and lymphatics, or it can be disseminated and systemic. Treatment for Mucor and Rhizopus is amphotericin B, and we need surgical debridement for the necrotic eschar. For Pneumocystis jirovecii, TMP-SMX is the drug of choice, which stands for trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole. Other options include clindamycin, pentamidine, and dapsone for prophylaxis rather than treatment. Speaking of dapsone, can you mention two different diseases for which dapsone can offer treatment? Comment below. How do we treat sporotrichosis? The answer is potassium iodide and itraconazole. Let's review Mucor and Rhizopus. It's a fungus with non-septate hyphae that branch at wide angles, 90 degrees or more, as in this branching action right here. If you have leukemia or diabetic ketoacidosis, you are high risk. Why? Because hyperglycemia and ketosis, or hyperketonemia, help this fungus grow and grow and grow. Expect black eschar, rhinocerebral abscess. It penetrates through the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone, and that's about it. Next, we have Pneumocystis jirovecii, which is a fungus, affects immunocompromised persons. Fever is expected. Hypoxemia is common. How do we diagnose it? Bronchoalveolar lavage. We can do a biopsy. Visualize it with the methamine silver stain. Expect the saucer on a cup-shaped yeast, and you treat with trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole, and you start prophylaxis when the CD4 count drops below 200. Last, we have Sporothrix schenki, which is a fungus. It is thermally dimorphic. It is mold in the cold and yeast in the beast. The yeast form looks like a cigar. If the thorn of the flower pricks you, you can get infected with Sporothrix schenki. Expect local pustules or ulcers. A pustule is filled with pus. These will drain into the near lymph nodes. Expect lymphadenopathy, lymphangiitis, and lymphadenitis, inflammation of lymphatic vessels and lymph nodes. Treat with potassium iodide and itraconazole. Use the link in the description box to try Picmonic for free. And if you decide to subscribe, you get access to more than 1,800 different Picmonics, including Picmonics for all of the high-yield bacteria and fungi and viruses and parasites. And that's just microbiology. You can also find Picmonics for anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, pathology, psychology, internal medicine, and even statistics. My favorite Picmonic subjects are microbiology, pharmacology, genetics, and obstetrics and gynecology. Whether you're studying to be a doctor, a nurse, physician assistant, nurse practitioner, pharmacist, PT, OT, a dentist, or a paramedic, Picmonic has a solution for you. You can download the app for free right now on your phone or tablet. tablet and go to picmonic.com/VIP hookup/medicosis and they will hook you up. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you Picmonic for sponsoring this video. Click on this link in the description box. We'll see you next time. As always, be safe, stay happy, study hard. This is Medicosis Perfectionalis, where medicine makes perfect sense.